Call the meeting to order. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Westborough Economic Development Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Westborough's website at www.town.westborough.ma.us. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so in the following manner. Westborough TV. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time, being via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the Town of Westborough's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive recording of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. Great. Very good. Is that all set, Kim? Okay,
Yes.
she would be on mute. Okay, very good. All right. First time for me. Well, great. Thank you all. Appreciate everyone's ongoing commitment and all of the initiatives that everyone has underway. I just wanted to welcome everyone. We have a full agenda, and I think we all would agree that we are thrilled to have Zach on board. He has jumped in, and as you'll see from the discussions today, you would think he's been on board for 3 months at this point. So I think several of us have had the opportunity to meet with Zach and Fred in person outside. We happened to walk on a beautiful day last week downtown and found a spot to sit and talk. And I was just really thrilled to meet Zach in person. And I think we've got a lot of a strong future ahead. So with that, I will move to the next item on the agenda. Okay, was that you, Zach?
I believe, do we need to do a vote on the meeting minutes?
Oh,
from
I'm
last
sorry.
week?
I'm sorry. Yes, we have to vote on the minutes from last month. I'll make a motion to approve. We'll do a roll call approval. Sullivan. Okay,
I'll
go ahead,
second
Alan.
that. I'll second the motion.
Okay. So Edinburgh, yes, then?
Yes.
Townsend, yes.
Leonardo, yes.
Alexander, yes.
Robbins, yes.
Sorry, yes.
Rayleigh, yes.
Very good. Great, good to see you, Scott.
Hi.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, moving on.
Awesome. With that, I thought that I would begin with a little bit of an introduction to myself for those of you who haven't had the opportunity to meet me yet. First off, I want to say I'm very excited to be here and to be a part of the work that the EDC does. I am coming from a consulting background. I have previously worked at McKinsey & Company, which is a global management consulting firm, and where I did a variety of projects, some pertaining to economic development, mostly at the state and federal level, as well as a few projects in the private equity space, focusing on growth strategy for potential targets. I'm very excited to be here. I'm a near lifelong resident of Massachusetts, with the exception of a small stint in New York City during and shortly after college. But I am a resident of Waltham, and I grew up in the Waltham and Watertown area. And I'm very happy to be here in Westborough, helping out and doing what I can. Really excited to be working with all of you. And with that, I will share my screen and begin presenting a discussion document to help aid our conversation on EDC goal setting for 2021. I would envision that I'll do a quick flip through of the deck, slide deck. It should take about 10, I think, to 15 minutes. And then I'd love to open it up for discussion, and we can go back to specific slides if that's helpful. And as I'm going through, please feel free to stop me and let me know if there's any questions that you have that I could clarify, or any comments that you want to make, and I'm happy to engage along the way. 1 second. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Great. So just wanted to remind everybody about what our objective is here. Is the EDC has a pretty well-established purpose that I believe in December you all had stacked hands on again. And we are trying to align on 3 to 5 goals for the EDC in 2021. Last month, at our last month meeting, I know Alan had put together a great document and synthesized a lot of feedback that he'd heard about possible goals for the EDC to consider. And we'd heard that those goals span 4 categories: downtown revitalization, outreach, programs, or advice to the Board of Selectmen, Planning Board, and other bodies. For a reminder, this was more or less the list of initiatives that Alan helped pull together and synthesize, and very helpfully also assigned relative scale, scope, and bucketed the initiatives based on which of those categories they fell into. I think we're all pretty familiar with this list, so I will move on and talk about how the staff started thinking about ways to try and winnow the list down a bit, so that we could really pin down 3 to 5 things to go after for the coming year. So first, what we did was we looked at the list and tried to identify what goals could potentially be addressed or are already being addressed by the master planning effort. And a lot of what we filtered out there were things around zoning, land use regulation, or promotion of mixed use development. We just felt that that is more aligned with the master planning effort than I think an EDC goal to own for 2021. The next step that we took was, and I think some of you may know a little bit about this already. In fact, Todd and Alan are stakeholders, formal stakeholders for this initiative. It's called the LRRP, the Local Rapid Recovery Planning Initiative. And I will be speaking a little bit more about that later in the meeting. But what it is at a high level is a technical assistance grant that we have received from the Department of Housing and Community Development. And we have been partnered with a team of consultants from a firm called Haggerty Consulting. And they are helping us look at the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on businesses, specifically in our downtown area, and helping us think about some initiatives or programs to detail and implement to make that economic recovery easier on businesses in the downtown area specifically. So what we did here was we filtered out a lot of the initiatives around the downtown revitalization, with the idea that we can use the LRRP to evaluate very critically what's actually needed by those businesses, and develop initiatives that could become any one of these ones that had appeared on the long list of goals. And then the third step that we applied was we looked at some of the remaining initiatives and tried to consolidate them together and make a really big bet on things like outreach and the ambassador program. So for example, for outreach, we noticed that there were a lot of goals around outreach, but a lot of them were things that were relatively small in scope. So we just folded them all together and made a big outreach, comprehensive outreach strategy and implementation goal. This process, and you can see on the left-hand side here, a table that kind of summarizes what I just walked you through, helped us reach 4 goals, specifically 1 on leveraging the LRRP for downtown revitalization, 2, creating and executing an outreach strategy, and 3, reviving the ambassador program. The fourth goal we decided to also consider, which is reevaluating EDC membership and things like the right mix of staff versus community representatives on the committee, what subcommittees are particularly pertinent for the coming year and the future, etc. And so now I have just a couple one-pagers on sort of each of these goals and what they entail. And so, as I said previously, goal number 1 is about leveraging the LRRP grant to try and tackle some downtown revitalization that I know everyone is very excited about. And this page speaks a little bit more to what the LRRP is and its objectives. Mainly to, I think at the end, the final goal will be to develop actionable projects that reflect the community's recovery needs, available resources, and capacity. And so hopefully what we will see out of this initiative is a set of about 5 projects that the town could run with to help our downtown recover easier. Goal number 2 is about creating and executing a comprehensive outreach strategy. And so under this broader goal, I've listed a couple of key action items that I think that we will need to do in order to execute on this. So specifically updating and maintaining the business directory, updating the website, updating marketing materials, actually kind of taking a step back, being a little bit more strategic and coming up with an outreach plan. Doing that regular outreach and making sure that we touch upon in those conversations things like the business's actual plans for growth and expansion, advertising our grant programs, and distributing newsletters and promotional materials. So this all, I think, is a broader outreach goal because they're all related in the sense that we want to make sure that no matter what outreach we're doing, we have a comprehensive strategy and that each piece plays a very specific role and creates specific value for us. Goal number 3 is to revive the ambassador program, and which Peter Allen and I got going on this morning as we were doing some door knocking to try and source some input from downtown businesses on the LRRP. But essentially, the ambassador program, from what I've heard, is a great program and a great idea and comes from a great place, but that I think over the last couple of years, due to, I think, staff turnover, might have like lost its way a little bit. And so we want to take a step back and critically evaluate how should the EDC ambassador program work? What kinds of support materials can we put around our EDC ambassadors to make them more effective and to, again, actually have to create a lot of value for the town and for the businesses that they support? How do we recruit more EDC ambassadors when we need them? And what are the other kinds of activities that we can involve them in beyond kind of what like, I guess, normal outreach of, just checking in and seeing how folks are doing and probing for expansion plans, things like ribbon cuttings or other promotional events. And then goal number 4 is a goal around assessing EDC's membership. And under this one, I would really like to just tee up a few questions for committee discussion. The first is that, recognizing that staff and our involvement is not necessarily contingent on committee membership, and that we comprise a high number of seats in the EDC. Like, what is the right mix of staff and community representatives for this body? And then second, given that subcommittees are required by open meeting law to publish agendas and minutes for their meetings, whereas meetings between staff are not necessarily required to do so, what subcommittees should the EDC continue to have or have that they don't already? And what issues require engagement beyond staff? So from the EDC members who are not already town staff. And the third question is around, should the EDC consider potentially like a regular cadence for chairperson and vice chairperson nominations and elections? And then if so, what should that cadence be? And then at the bottom, I think there's a bit of a caveat here. And Kim, feel free to also voice thoughts if I'm getting this wrong, but the EDC will need to confirm if any of the changes resulting from this discussion about EDC membership will require a vote by the Board of Selectmen versus going to open town meeting. And so we'll need to figure that out before we can really action any of the questions here. And then third, because this is a process that we're really talking about goals for the next 6 to 12 months, thought it would make sense to include a proposal for how we would structure this process every year as a recurring process. So thinking in October, having the coordinator with support from EDC members and potentially the ambassadors as well, kicking off some outreach and survey dissemination to collect ideas from the community for next year's goals. Then in November, providing an update to the EDC on those outreach with the early returns. In December, coming back with like a long list, similar to what Alan pulled together for us for our last meeting. And then January, incorporating any feedback from the EDC, presenting a final draft proposal for the coming year's goals, and then putting them to a vote by the EDC. And then for the rest of the year, running with those goals and hitting the ground running and getting them implemented. So that was my little presentation, but I think the most important part of this is the discussion aspect. So I would love to take the next 20 to 30 minutes and hear your thoughts and feedback and incorporate that in a final version that I would bring before the EDC at its next meeting. And hopefully we could bring that to a vote and finalize this. And I'm happy to, again, flip back to any prior pages if it's helpful to have that as a landing page for discussion.
Great. Thank you, Zach. And thank you for, for your organized presentation. We're really grateful to benefit from your professional experience with this presentation. So be great. I don't know, Fred, if you have anything that you'd like to add as you've been working with Zach.
Sure. Well, a couple of things, and one of my comments I may defer until he goes over the LLRP. But I think that we try to, and Zach tried to do what we collectively tried to do when we met, is to synthesize the whole list that Alan had done a great job of going through and doing as part of the survey. So that what Zach presented is basically what we believe to be a synthesis of all that information. Mm-hmm. So I think what Zach is saying now is important to get feedback from all of you to see if you're in agreement, want to tweak it, throw it out and start over. Well, hopefully we won't do that, but the feedback really now is the important point.
Yeah. Maybe we should start with Alan, given Alan, you had done the survey and assembled everything, and now Zach has compiled it all. I think, done a great job. You both made a significant contribution, and knowing that you're going to need to head off early, do you have any comments on what you're reviewing?
A couple of minor comments I'll throw up, and then one concern. With the outreach in goal number 2 and the thought of a newsletter, I think something more regular than semi-annual would be appropriate. I'm not saying monthly or bi-monthly, but I think you want at least quarterly. And in the past, we've talked about having some sort of quarterly event, whether it's a broker's breakfast, the annual gala, and 2 other type events throughout the year. And maybe it's not 4 times a year, maybe it's 3 times a year for the newsletter, but something with a little more touch points so we keep more top in mind. The other small comment just for consideration is in the goal and planning setting is presented, it's a calendar year. And I guess my question is that, I'm not sure if it should be calendar year or fiscal year or another cycle. So the question is, if we come up with a goal and part of that goal is a program that's going to require funding, where does that fit? How does the goal an objective timeline annually fit in with where we'd be far enough in a program or know at the start of a program that we need funding to get it in a timely manner before town meeting, either, you know, in March or in October. And so I'm wondering, you know, if we set our goals in January, you know, December, January timeframe, and part of that is a, you know, one of those goals is a program we think we're going to need $15,000. Will we be, you know, able to get something in place in time for March town meeting, or would it end up being pushed back to October, which you've lost, you know, I don't say you've lost 9 months, but potentially slowed things down a bit. Whereas maybe goals, you know, maybe it's in October, you know, we try and shift it by a quarter. So we're setting goals in October so that we can be part of the budget process for regular town meeting, or we do it a little bit later in the spring and assume that the money would hit for the money requests would come to fall town meeting. So just food for thought there as we go forward. Can you go to the slide on the ambassador program? Okay.
Did it change for everyone?
Yes, it did, at least for me. So, okay. I guess when we talk about reviving the ambassador program in a new operating model, you know, I understand in the past that the ambassador program was effective, but I also know it was very limited in scope and the number and even the nature of businesses that we were able to cover. And as a business owner, I can tell you I probably get 25 to 30 requests for my time from people who are trying to sell or market to me on a daily, at least on a daily basis. And so I think just saying we're gonna, not that it should be eliminated, but if the focus is on going to business saying, hey, what's up, expansion plans, how are things going, let's keep in touch, that's great. We're gaining a lot of valuable information from that, but we're taking time of the business, and I think it'll be hard to do because there's not a great value proposition for the business. As a business owner, if someone called up and said, hey, I'm with economic development, we want to talk about your business, where you're at, what your growth plans might be, my response would be that that's nice, but, you know, time's of the essence, or I don't have any specific plans, right? So I'm of the opinion, some might say strong opinion, that the outreach should be strategic but executed tactically. So so that our communications and it really has to tie into the whole overall outreach program, the ambassador program does, so that our communications, we're gathering that information, but the way we're in the door is that we're offering something of value to the businesses we're outreaching to. And so, for example, you know, we and this fell off my plate, you know, getting out to businesses that there were enhanced incentives and grants available for adding electronic, you know, vehicle charging stations, right? That's a reason for the ambassadors to reach out to businesses and say, you know, hey, there's this, you know, we're calling from the EDC, there's a great program that can help bring customers into your business, or, you know, make it more, you know, add value to your property, because people with electronic vehicles will want to go to doctors in your building and charge, right? You know, and it's a way, it has a purpose. You know, Q4 of last year, it could have been about the VIA WRTA service. You know, hey, we have a way, you know, hey, small auto shop, right? Here's a way that you can provide customers a ride to the train station or work for $2, for $1 or $2, right? And that lets you provide a courtesy transportation service like the dealerships do. And so having a reason to communicate and open those lines of communication, I think is, you know, really important. More than just, hey, you know, periodically we're going to try and reach out to every business in town, or a majority of businesses in town, just to chat and catch up. So a long-winded viewpoint, but I'm wondering how other folks see that.
I think that's a a good point. Value proposition is always critical, and identifying that is always important to do. I think probably I'd say in the last couple of years, in the absence of staffing, much of what we were doing with outreach would be in informing them of being the recipient of an annual award and inviting them to the breakfast to engage with other local businesses. So, but many, and if they weren't receiving an award, weren't interested because they weren't sure of what the value was for them and weren't sure it was something they wanted to add to their plate. So there's no question that it is. And then once they go one time and they hear the lieutenant governor and they see other local businesses, they recognize the value. But identifying what is in it for the people whose time we're going for is very important.
And I think it's sort of, I know in the past we've talked about, how we best engage with, the Corridor 9495 chamber, for example. And, as I see it, as a chamber, as a membership organization, they've expanded their region is their growth strategy. And so their mission isn't really specific to Westborough. And so a lot of the services the chamber has offered has switched because of that more regional focus. So I think there's an opportunity to brand the EDC as and the town itself as a resource for the business community. Whether it's sharing information about grant programs, other or other opportunities for them to build or expand their business. And then the other piece is, where do we do marketing and outreach outside of Westborough? We're in our goals, are we looking at restaurants in Waltham who might be looking, as come out of the pandemic, might be looking for another location, and we want to attract them here, or businesses who are leaving downtown Boston to do smaller suburban outposts, less commute, more remote work. How do we connect with those businesses to let them know what we have available for them here?
Yep, all good points. I would say at this point, the only thing that I would say we're currently involved in is with Mass Econ, with attempts to promote the town more for site location, but really not actively on the smaller business front. I think there was a time in the past when Jim Robbins was actively participating in Metro West Chamber events, which was allowing for more, reach beyond the town to smaller businesses. But that's not something they've offered in the last few years. So those are all great ideas. Did you have anything further, Alan?
No, those were my, initial thoughts. And I hope I'm not too coming off as overly passionate on it, but I'm interested in hearing what other people think as well.
So I have a comment. I think Alan's point is well taken. I think it's easy for government to come up with programs that we think are going to stimulate business interest. If we don't show them why it's valuable to them, they won't take the time, because they're small businesses, particularly, their time is at a premium. They don't have time for general chit chat. You might see that more with a larger company who have long range plans. So for them to discuss something with you informally that they've been kicking around for a while is one thing, but small business doesn't have time for that. So I think Alan's point is well taken. We need to come armed with reasons why they should give us their time, and we need to tell them what we can do for them to give them a competitive advantage and help their business grow. On another topic, unless someone wants to discuss that further, I had a request to go back to the goals because I had a question.
Yeah, I was just going to mention one more thing where Zach brought up the idea of subcommittees. And I think that when we look at value proposition, that may be an area where we can factor in subcommittees and think about, okay, do we have a group that assembles small, downtown businesses? Do we have a group that is assembling some of the larger users, and just another that might assemble some of the brokers and gather, that might be appropriate for future broker breakfasts, things that where we can get together groups that would have common interests, where we can clearly identify the value proposition and, and make it not trying to be targeting such a large universe. So, but go ahead, Jim, back to your comment on the goals.
Yeah, thank you, Zach. If you could go back to the main page. Can you make that a little bit bigger? Okay, thank you. The comment number 3, goal number 3, leverage CoStar to identify lease renewals and outreach in advance. Do we have a CoStar account yet?
Not that I'm aware. Does anyone know?
Is John on the call? John Steinberg? I didn't see him.
I don't believe so, no.
Okay,
We had one in the past.
okay, because I know the assessors have one, and they have to be careful who they lend that information to, because you have to buy a subscription and a license. So I think that's a good idea to leverage CoStar. My question is just to make sure that we do that properly. And we reach out to John and see what we need to do to get our own license and how much it costs.
I have a meeting with John on Monday, Jim, so I can thank you for flagging, and I'll raise that with him to see the details about that.
Okay. I'm going to continue to look at this list. There was one other that jumped out at me, and I'm just going to have to look down the list while other people are talking.
Are there others that want to comment on the goals? Maybe if we run through the list. I don't know, Todd, do you have comments?
Well, I think that, first of all, thanks for putting this together, Zach. This is great. And I think, Alan, you bring up a very good point about timing and how we want to position or set the goals as it relates to the calendar year versus the fiscal year. One thing we haven't talked about yet, which I think we should, and it's kind of an underlying issue for the EDC, is that of the membership. I do think that not only how we structure the EDC is important, but also how we get more participants. Because I think that even just trying to get some additional ambassadors is going to be a challenge right now. Everybody's plate seems to be full, and so I think that there's probably some discussion needed on how some ideas that people may have as to how we can try and create some more interest and participants in the EDC itself, whether it's getting people on the board or additional ambassadors. I think it's much needed. So,
Jim, am I okay to flip back to the membership page? Jim,
Jim, are you still looking at the list?
No, I found it. I was waiting for others to finish. I found what I wanted to speak about. So just really.
Oh, I was just gonna, sorry, just in response to Todd, just
Yeah,
ask
please flip back. Go ahead.
if there was, do folks have a strong perspective on how large the EDC should be, in the sense as to whether or not it should be a smaller or larger body?
I think we're somewhat bound by the what was voted on right through the town meeting as far as how the board was supposed to be structured. I think at this point we're bound by that, but I think it's something that needs to be discussed and possibly reevaluated as to whether or not that's the most effective structure that we have right now.
When we added the ambassador program, it was in response to looking at the effectiveness of, for one community, as an example of Marlborough, where they had basically almost like corporators or additional business advocates as on their, as an extension of their board, and it allowed them to have access to more resources. And we were saying we've got a lot of professionals within our community that have a lot of value that we can tap into. So I think that was the idea. Maybe as we're looking at subcommittees and maybe we identify people that we think would be targets that have certain backgrounds, and we approach them as kind of a in the ambassador role. I guess the simple answer would be, I think we can have a smaller working group to make it manageable, and then subcommittees that pull in more people, and then kind of the ambassadors that give us more reaches out into the community when we have events and want to get further penetration out into within the community.
Thanks, Bonnie. That's very helpful.
There's one other thing that was brought up about calendar year or fiscal year, and I get that's always been a question that I had, and I guess I would ask, when the annual report is done, is that always based on the fiscal year? So it's 7/1 through 6/30?
No, annual reports are calendar year.
Okay, because when we've done our,
Statutory.
okay, calendar year. So basically when you just completed the I guess the 2020 calendar or 2020 annual report is now being presented for town meeting in the spring of 2021.
Yes.
Okay, all right, because I know as we've done our annual review each year, we've been looking at the calendar year, but it was always, a question. So that's helpful to clarify that while the town operates on a fiscal year, the annual report is presented based on the calendar year. Okay. Great.
That's always kind of been a rub between, when you're doing your budget is obviously the fiscal year, the annual report is the calendar year. To Alan's point, I think when you're talking about things that may have some, it may require budget requests, trying to align things to the budget year makes more sense. You can always play with the numbers and try to, sometimes it's a little more difficult, but you can pull things out and capture the calendar year. But I think Alan's point about, needing to line up to the budget year so that if there is an initiative, you're not having to hold it off, or you're trying to make it so you can line those things up in the most logical.
And there are times where, if we're setting a goal in January, we might know in January that there's going to be a cost associated, and we're looking for an allocation, which is still time to get it onto the March warrant. I mean, tight, but it can be done. But if there's an initiative where, there's a couple months worth of work to figure out, what the scope would be and what funding we might actually need, then setting the goal in January really puts that funding off until October. And so, whether we align the goal year with the fiscal year or the calendar year, or even, an October 1, so that, is the back to school mindset comes back into play. There's goal setting, and then we've got, we set goals in October. That gives us 3-4 months to determine if we need funding at annual town meeting for anything. So I'm not sure what the right answer is and how to best manage that. If
I could jump in on that one item, that it's further out, can we kind come to some kind of consensus whether we should try to mimic it on a fiscal year and see how that works? Yes, no, maybe.
Yeah, I was just thinking for a second. Yeah, because that means if we're setting goals for a fiscal year, where the goals are set end of June or our July meeting for the upcoming year, then if there was a funding component, we would be able to get it on the warrant for October. Because I wouldn't want us, in July to say, hey, we've got this great idea for a program, and then not be able to get the funding on the warrant and have to wait till March of the following, year to get the funding and start the program.
Well, I mean, I think we're positioned to do that, so why don't we try to do that then? We're going to be kind of set up for that because we're running it will be May, June anyway, by the time we get this done, so it would kind of work out in that way this year. We can go that way.
I'm supportive of that. I'm comfortable trying that and seeing how it works.
Okay.
So I apologize for being late, but I jumped in on this conversation and I just wanted to make a comment and let me know if I'm off because I missed something earlier. But depending on what the program is, it could potentially be a budgetary item, and so that would be a March. The budget would be a March town meeting. So it's not necessarily that all of your projects and goals would be funded through warrant articles. And typically October is for emergency and emergency articles and supposed to be for zoning. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that whatever your goals are, if it's a long-standing program that you're trying to get off the ground, it could potentially be a budgetary item and wouldn't come in October. I don't think that should change your timing of the goals, though. I think fiscal makes sense.
Sure. What the goals themselves, I mean, we've had some conversation on the ambassador program. I certainly think Zach can tweak that somewhat, but how about the other goals? I mean, I haven't had a lot of conversation on those. If everybody's kind of happy with those, not happy with it.
I like the leveraging the grant program for downtown revitalization and creating the outreach strategy. Certainly we know the importance of the, updating the database and the website. So I think those are both very good and very tactical. Do others have things they want to add there?
I would agree that, goal one, the LLRP, leveraging that is great because many of the ideas that we came up with, as a team on this list about downtown, the study that we're getting through the LLRP grant will really give us an indication and help prioritize those. I assume some of the ideas that we talked about as far as potential programs, whether it's a business improvement district or, altering parking and wayfinding, we had many different ideas there that we could potentially pursue. I think if, the LLRP grant is going to help us have a strategy and prioritize those, and so we'll fall into place there. So I like that, and I think our community has been really looking for a very proactive approach to revitalizing and improving the downtown area. I think we've got a good path forward there with the LLRP grant, and aligning ourselves with that is the wise move.
Keeping an eye to the clock, and obviously I don't want to cut off anybody from speaking who would like to and who would like to provide any feedback on these goals. But I think what I'm hearing is that in terms of next steps, we can refine the ambassador goal according to the feedback that we've heard today, and also refine the operating model to make sure that it aligns with the fiscal year instead of the annual calendar year. And come back with a final set of these 4 goals for a vote at our next meeting. And then I think for the membership question, we can try and find time at a later EDC meeting, maybe closer to the summer or in the summer, to have a longer discussion about that question. Does that sound right to everyone?
Yes.
Awesome. Cool. In that case, I think we can move on to the next item on the agenda, which is just a quick update on the LRRP. If you give me 1 sec, I will flip to my other PowerPoint pages and just provide a quick update on that. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. So I just wanted to provide you with a quick overview of what the LRRP will look like, which is it's a 3-phase program. And as I had said earlier, the final output is a report that the consultants will help us draft that will detail a handful of initiatives the town could consider implementing to help our businesses in the downtown area recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and its economic effects more easily. The first phase, which we are undertaking right now, is the diagnostics phase. We had our kickoff meeting with our formal group of stakeholders, of which Todd and Alan are members, this past Tuesday. We have defined the study area, which is the same area that qualifies for the vacant storefront program. And you can see this map here. And I'm sorry, Todd, I haven't actually updated this since the kickoff meetings. This industrial marking is actually inaccurate. But that said, this is the study area overlapping with the mass vacant storefronts program. And the consultants will actually be on the ground here in Westborough next Thursday and Friday, where they will be doing some data collection and a site visit. And we've also just launched our business survey to try and get a sense of what our business community is feeling and the impacts that they felt from the COVID-19 pandemic, and what potential initiatives or what assistance and help they feel like would be most critical. And then this will culminate with a presentation of these phase 1 findings at the end of April. And then we will dive into phase 2, which is actually developing these project ideas. I think the beginning will be very like a lot of brainstorming and ideating about what the art of the possible might be, testing that against what we learned in the diagnostic phase, and then coming up with actual detailed implementation plans for some of these projects and making final project recommendations sometime in the middle to end of June. And then phase 3 will really be kind of putting a bow on everything and wrapping it up by drafting our final report, consulting all of our stakeholders and making sure that they are supportive of what's going in the report, and finalizing with a presentation towards the end of July. In terms of the progress that we've made to date, Peter Allen and I have actually started in the last 2 days going around the study area and eliciting folks to fill out the business survey. We have begun distributing the business survey, and we have actually, if I can just flip to the map, so far covered all of the businesses before the train tracks. So everything up here, and we're continuing every day to go out and do some in-person, face-to-face door knocking to try and drum up knowledge of this business survey and enthusiasm for the program. And as I said, next week, the consultants will be on the ground and also have some data for us to look at as well. Does anyone have any questions or other thoughts related to the LRRP?
Zach, I had a quick question.
Yep.
Anywhere in there does the data indicate, or will there be any indication about what the rents are in our community? What the triple net leases look like? What are the costs of renting versus other
Yes,
communities?
that is one of the data items that they intend to collect. And I believe that their plan for collecting that is relatively qualitative, or not qualitative, but more empirical and less like quantitative based. I think it's possible that we could work with John, and this is on one of the list of questions that I have for my meeting with him on Monday, to try and get a pulse on that information. But I think they're also planning to try and talk to some of our stakeholders and talk to some of the property owners in the area to try and get a more qualitative idea of what rents are for different types of tenants.
Okay.
I guess this is Pete Allen. I'll just throw in a couple of comments as I guess the only remaining ambassador. First, I was thrilled to have something positive to do for the EDC. Zach asking me to help distribute the flyer to businesses, basically from Dunkin' Donuts down to the new branch of Middlesex Savings. But I thought you might be interested in the reaction of the people that Zach and I were knocking on doors. My own experience was, you're always worried that business will say, oh, it's another survey. Frankly, almost all of them, all but one business that I called on, when they heard the overview of what it was going to be used for, and we basically, if we were aiming to do some things in the downtown area, we'd like to have their input. They basically said, oh, 15-minute survey by April 12th, we'll be happy to do it. Thank you very much. And so it was an easy ask, and I think they were glad to be asked.
And likewise, I had the same experience on the other side of the street. A lot of enthusiasm, and only one business, again, said that they weren't interested, and it was a real estate agent. So not, I think, exactly the type of business that this program is really targeting. But overall, I think very good enthusiasm from the business community about this.
That's great. I'm curious, when you go out, you go door to door, you get the context. How do you then, compile the database of businesses that will receive the survey? Do you get contact information and then add their email addresses, or what are the plans?
So the survey is actually run by the state themselves, Department of Housing and Community Development. And they have provided us with, there's a Westborough specific survey. We have a link to it, as well as a flyer with a QR code that you can use your phone to scan and then fill it out very easily like that. So I have been distributing those, and Peter has been incredibly helpful as well in doing that. And we've been distributing those flyers and explaining how they can fill out the survey either online on their desktop or with their phone. Are
you finding that the surveys, the listing of companies within the survey is, I don't know, what's the source of their database?
So we haven't, I'm not sure if they have like a database of companies in the study area at all. So we've just been kind of, we know the town relatively well. And so we've been just visiting the businesses that we know are marked within the bounds here of the study area. Okay. And there is, to my knowledge, nothing stopping a company, like there's no technical thing about the survey stopping somebody from outside the study area from filling it out, which is why we have tried to use more of this in-person canvassing and grassroots style outreach as opposed to social media blasts or leveraging like the chamber's email list, for example.
Yep. Okay.
Though we are getting an email list from the chamber, which the consultants have offered to filter down to just the businesses that are in the study area. And then we'll shoot out an email blast early next week.
Oh, great. Good.
Any other questions here, or shall we move on to our next agenda item?
No, let me just make a quick comment on that. Zach's done a great job of trying to coordinate this, keeping in mind that his life will be consumed certainly for the next month and beyond to get this wrapped up and coordinated. The Haggerty Group's looking to do this very rapidly. So there's not a lot of time frame to do this. So he will be spending a lot of time absorbed in this particular production, if you will. So we're looking for good things out of this.
It's great. Great job.
Awesome. I think next is Peter.
Okay, I think next on the agenda is the discussion on the climate action plan.
Yes, thank you. Let me share my screen. Am I going to be able to do that?
Peter, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
We appreciate your continued commitment to the Climate Action Task Force, and you know, really know the amount of can appreciate the amount of time that you've put into it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and appreciate those comments. We have come to the Economic Development Committee at least once before, maybe a couple times. And so this isn't the first time, but we are pulling into the culmination of the effort. And so I appreciate the time to be able to summarize it and talk about our next steps and path forward. As you're aware, the task force was formed about a year ago. And the ultimate goal was to address the causes of climate change, and particularly to be consistent with the statewide goals and to make sure that Westborough is doing our fair share of meeting the statewide goals. And at this time, the state has established that a net zero by 2050 is the goal. And underneath that, there's a 1,000 other little goals, but that's the overarching goal, and that's what we're working with. I did want to acknowledge the great team that was put together of some employees and board committee chairman and so forth. I appreciated all that, and some very strong at-large members who've made great contribution to this and have worked very hard to get us where we are. So to start with, I wanted to say that we are grounding all of our work in the work that's coming out of the state. At the end of last year, the end of last year and since then, there have been three major activities. One was this decarbonization roadmap, which discusses all of the scientific, economic trade-offs and evaluated 8 different pathways for getting to the net zero by 2050 goal. And out of this work, there was 3 key areas that were identified as the overarching most important. And when we looked at it in Westborough, we came to the same conclusions. And in the bottom center, it's moving to much more renewable, clean electricity supply and eliminating the fossil fuels in the generation of our electricity. And then in the top left and top right, it's electrifying our buildings and our transportation sector so that the fossil fuels are eliminated continuously from now until 2050. And so these are the overarching goals. There's other things like land use, which are important, and particularly the value of our forests and lands for sequestration. And in the non-energy, there's various agricultural and industrial processes that emit greenhouse gases also, but they're much smaller than the big 3 that I've highlighted here. So when we evaluated our options, we began by evaluating about 15 or 20 communities who have developed similar plans, climate action plan, net zero plans, they call them different things. Through that process, through the evaluation of the statewide goals, we have evaluated and selected these 4 as our primary goals. And the 4 that are highlighted are the ones that have the greatest greenhouse gas reduction within the community. Again, clean electricity, building and transportation electrification, and the energy efficiency, which is the most economic way to reduce your greenhouse gases, is just not to use electricity, not to use energy. The secondary goals, again, are valuable. They're valuable the passive recreation that comes from the natural environment and biking and pedestrian and so forth. These are all important and are included in our plan, but the ones that really change the greenhouse gas emissions are across the top. As an example of the goals, and each of these 3 goals reflect basically the statewide goals. First is by 2030 to have 20% of the registered vehicles in Massachusetts electric vehicles. And by this, we mean battery electric vehicles, fully electric. And the state has come out with a preliminary plan that all new cars and trucks sold after 2035 must be EVs. This is in the light duty vehicle category. This is consistent with activities that have initiated in California. Now there's a set of states that are rallying around that same standard. So it's going to be a very rapid change in the electric vehicle market over the next decade and into 2035. In the building heating system, the state is pushing very hard on converting to electric heat pumps as the primary source of heating in all systems. And particularly 25% of the households are expected to convert to primary source of heat from heat pumps by 2035. Commercial space, they have another goal. It's not on the slide. I'm not going to be able to quote it. It's a certain number of million square feet of commercial space converted to heat pumps by 2030 also. And of course, we're converting to electricity, which creates efficiencies and reduces greenhouse gases by itself. But the real leverage comes as we convert the sources of electricity away from fossil fuels. The state has made dramatic improvements over the last decade in this space, and we will continue to do so as a state. The opportunities in Westborough are built around 2 primary areas. The Westborough Power Choice had recently shifted to a higher renewable content in our default. And we're also going to be promoting greater build out of solar within the community. With those changes, we believe Westbrook can achieve a 38% greenhouse gas emission reduction in the next decade by 2030 compared to our 2017 baseline. And again, each of the percent shown on this scale is consistent with the statewide goal. So again, we're using the statewide analysis and the framework, the goal setting, and we're going to leverage all of the programs. There's going to be a tremendous lift by the state to make this transition. And it's going to be opportunity for Westborough. It's also going to be dictated to Westborough. It's going to be changes that we're not going to be able to unilaterally control. So we can help prepare the community for these transitions. So the critical success factor is twofold. One is community engagement and the other is governance. Community engagement, the changes associated with this plan are community-wide. It's every resident, every business, everything that's using fossil fuels today is going to be impacted, and it's going to impact everyone differently. And that's true, including businesses. Every business is going to have a different perspective and a different impact. And we need to be sensitive to this. We need to be smart in how we're engaging the community. The key thing I think we need to do is to provide timely information. And timely information is needed because the cheapest time to make these conversions in a heating system is when the heating system needs to be replaced anyways. So you don't want to be asking people to take out a functioning heating system and replace it. You want to catch them on a replacement cycle. So you need the information and the education in place in advance. And there are state incentives that are going to be valuable. Some of them are time-based. getting that information into the community is going to be valuable. There's also going to be regulatory changes. Some activities are going to be used to raise the price of fossil fuels. I think having that type of information available is going to be valuable. So again, getting that information out in a timely manner is a critical factor of being successful here. The bottom section is about one of the things we learned when we looked at other communities and other municipalities that had done this work. There were quite a few that had put together what looked like pretty good plans. And then when we followed up with them, it seemed like it was kind of shelfware. They developed a plan and then they didn't have the follow implementation. So from day one, we've been very concerned and very focused on ensuring that that doesn't happen with the effort we've made here. So we've started discussions with Christy and the town staff concerning how we coordinate. I think there's an important role for volunteers and Sustainable Westborough and in other community organizations and committees. But also there's important roles for the town staff that I think we're just beginning to understand. The communities that have been most successful have identified a focal point, a sustainability coordinator, or some call them energy director or energy manager, have been identified in the towns that have been most successful. And we're recommending that that be done in Westborough. So we are wrapping up with the boards and committee reviews and feedback. We're continuing to look for feedback. We're going to redraft the plan based on the feedback we've already received from other boards and from the community at large, and whatever comes from the selectmen, and provide that to the there we go, and provide it to the Board of Selectmen in their April 13th meeting, a new draft, an updated draft, a publication version of the document to be hopefully approved on April 13th. The other dynamic that happens at the state level is that last Friday, the governor signed a bill we're calling the 2021 Climate Roadmap Act that is one of the biggest climate legislation pieces since the original Global Warming Solutions Act. Is going to be pretty dramatic in regard to the changes that are affected. And because it's so new, the full implications of it aren't clear, but it's an example of the type of dynamic that we need to be prepared for. So one of the basic elements of the climate plan, the Westborough climate plan, is that we need to be flexible. We need to understand that it's dynamic, and that no plan we put together is gonna be valid for 10 years. So we're gonna have to keep an eye on the changes and make updates as needed with the changing technology, the changing legislative perspective and regulatory environment. So particular to this committee, I think business engagement is going to be really critical. As you appreciate, we actually were quite surprised when we did the analysis of the greenhouse gases, how much of the greenhouse gases in Westborough come from the commercial industrial space. We are working with other communities. We're in a program of about 10 different communities in the Metro West area, and Westborough has one of the highest proportions of our greenhouse gases coming from the commercial and industrial space, which is good for the community, tax base, all of that. But it creates challenges in regard to how do we affect change in this. So I think we're going to need to have ongoing discussions. I think the town needs to show leadership in this. I think there's opportunity for business engagement and a constructive discussion on this, because the state's going to be making these changes and we can help the business communities through the transition. I have discussed this with the CMRPC and the 495 Metro West Partnership, and I think there's opportunity for good regional collaboration. I am planning to meet with the Chamber of Commerce, although that hasn't happened yet. So those are my prepared comments. I'll leave it at that and ask if people had things they would like to discuss or add to that.
Fred, did you and Zach want to comment?
Sure. So one of the things I want the committee to understand is that part of the climate action plan asks for direct involvement from this committee. So you have to be, so be careful of that. Make sure you read that and understand what they're looking for there. I've already gotten pushback from landowners, commercial, industrial landowners in Westborough over this. Their big concern is that if it's done appropriately through state channels and it's done uniformly in the region, they're prepared to accept that. They're not looking to be forefront on this with their industry in Westborough. So I will tell you that. I've heard that directly from landowners in Westborough already. So we pointed out, Zach pointed out, myself pointed out, where the committee's looking for you to get involved directly from this committee. So I'd make sure that you understand that and aware of that.
And those sections of the report are in the email that I had sent out with the agenda and the Zoom link last week for your reference.
Could you send that to me, Zach?
Yes, I'll forward that to you right now, Pete.
Thank you.
So on a state level, what we're understanding is part of the legislation that Baker has signed is that the DOER, Department of Energy Resources, will actually get a seat on the state, what's called the Building Board of Regulations and Standards. And they'll go through a process to see how that gets implemented through zoning. We go through an international code and we implement energy compliance through that code. Massachusetts then makes amendments accordingly how they feel that they should amend the national codes. I think that's all going to be in place. I think when it gets implemented throughout the state, then we're on a uniform code. It becomes easier to implement these type of things. And that's the way and the guidance I'd be looking for, so that we're not singling out any particular business or industry, but they're all going to have to comply throughout the state. And then it becomes easier to enforce them.
Yeah, I agree that it's best when it's done statewide. And what I understand the climate bill to be headed toward is a new optional section of the code, which would be a net zero standard code that would be phased in between 2022 and 2028 with a municipal option during that period. And but by 2028, it's going to be mandatory statewide. So it's there will be this gray period where there's potential for adjacent communities to be running to different code.
Yeah, again, I warn this particular committee, again, not necessarily against that, to be careful with that. You know, you can have your own opinions and I'll do what the committee asks on that, but I've gotten unsolicited responses on that. Property owners, major property owners in town have come to me on it, not me going out to them.
And I just stated the options we have. I didn't recommend an option in my comment.
Great, Peter. Thank you.
In terms
Does
of
anyone
next,
have anything? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, in terms of next steps, does anyone have a perspective on what makes sense there?
So I talked to Pete previously, and obviously they're going to be looking for the selectmen to take a vote on the plan. And so I think the selectmen would benefit, and I know Alan had to drop off, but he and I had talked about some, the benefit of having votes from different committees in terms of support. And I think this committee is an important one. So I don't know, Pete, I can't remember which date we plan to bring it back to the selectmen in terms of timing, how that would work. But if this committee was prepared to vote or had an opportunity to vote, I think that would be helpful to the Board of Selectmen.
So the April 13th meeting.
We didn't have a formal vote prepared, but what is the vote that's proposed?
So Peter, you're still looking at the first meeting in April? I didn't know if you were going to push it out to get all the votes.
We're still looking at the first meeting in April.
So the selectmen are meeting on April 13th. So it would be obviously an off-cycle meeting for this group, but if you aren't prepared to vote today, which, makes sense, given that, you've just heard the presentation, if you would be willing to have an off-cycle meeting prior to the 13th, I think that would be helpful to the board.
Can you explain the cycle and the dates?
Well, just that Pete, the Climate Task Force presented gave a similar presentation to what you got today to the Board of Selectmen at their first meeting in March, and have since gone to multiple boards and committees to give this presentation and to get feedback. So he's certainly, I don't want to speak for him, but certainly interested in your feedback as a committee. But I think the Board of Selectmen, if they're asked to vote on it on April 13th, would benefit from this committee's vote of support or not.
My question was, what's the critical date for you to have support?
The 13th, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, their meeting is April 13th.
For the state, but what's the purpose? That's what I'm looking for. What's the purpose? Is this going to the state by a certain date that they've set up?
It's the selectmen, Jim. It goes to the Board of Selectmen. That's their meeting date.
The task force position is that the work is done, and we're looking for feedback. We are in the process of already getting some feedback and making changes. If there is some benefit in waiting longer, but we didn't feel like there was any need to wait longer, and it's an urgent issue that we feel time is of the essence, and we want to begin into moving into implementation phase. So it's on that basis.
Pete, I have one quick piece of feedback. And Grant, again, I'm not a member of the committee, but I think it would be potentially helpful before it goes to a vote before the EDC to have, if possible, for the Climate Action Task Force to have a perspective on what option of that suite of options you had mentioned for bringing things up to code in the 2022 to 2028 or 2028 range. If that could be more clear, I think it might make it easier for the committee to have a vote on it.
So,
and that's just my perspective, but if anybody else would like to.
Well, let me try to express that. I think Fred was alluding to it. The DOER is going to be more involved formally in the BBRS process than they have been in the past. That is going to take 2-3 months. We talked to somebody in DOER this morning, and it's going to take months before that gets established, exactly how that works. Then the work is going to proceed over the subsequent 6 months, where they actually try to say, okay, so what is the code? Who are the stakeholders? How do we do stakeholder gathering, reviews, and all that? So that process is going to take 6 or 9 months. However, I think this understanding in the climate bill is that it's going to be optional. So Westborough would be presented a code optional at the start date, 2022 is the one I've heard. And then at some point, it's going to become mandatory statewide. So Westbrook can do absolutely nothing until it becomes mandatory statewide. That's one of the paths we can take. Another is we can adopt it earlier. We don't know what it is, so I'm not here saying, let's go adopt it earlier. Let that process play out. We'll look at it, what's on the table, and we could have another discussion around whether it makes sense to do an early adoption, considering commercial development and the other pressures that everybody's going to be trying to consider. But there is a point at the end where it's going to be mandatory statewide, and it's not going to be a local option. And I think a role we can play is in preparing our businesses for these transitions that are coming.
So if I may, Pete, great presentation. Thank you very much for putting it together. However, I think my concern would be what Fred had brought up with, I think, some of these larger landlords in town that have expressed some concern. I'd like to maybe even have an opportunity to talk to them firsthand about it before we vote on something like this. I think it is the role of the EDC to promote business in town, and I would be fearful that some of those landowners and tenants may feel that we're doing just the opposite. I just want to be, I need to better familiarize myself with this, and I'd like to hear what some of their concerns are as well. I think it's worth our while to spend the time to talk to some of those folks.
I'd be happy to be in that discussion if it's possible, just to understand it myself.
So is that something we could potentially coordinate with some of those people who've reached out to you unsolicited?
Well, I know one individual would be more than happy to talk to your ear off on it, to be honest. But I don't know how we coordinate that with this and try to get you any kind of in the middle of April, to be honest with you.
Right. I feel that a vote for us, to be quite honest, I wouldn't feel comfortable voting on it. You know, I think we're, it's a lot of information to take in here. And I know you've, again, spent a lot of time on it. I appreciate that. But I think there's more research that we need to do as a committee before we can vote on this. That's just my personal opinion. I don't know how
I would
others
agree.
feel.
I think that, yeah, I would agree. I think that what we're able to do is to say that we appreciate the efforts, and we recognize that it would be a state mandated in the long term. However, and we do want to educate the business community, but at this point, you know, we could be in support by saying that we would engage with the business community to hear their concerns, but I don't think we can honestly state that we have been able to do that with the information that we have or the time available. So a letter of support could be that we will make an effort to, you know, engage and solicit their feedback, but I don't think that's something that we can do. We certainly can't do now, and we wouldn't be able to do within 2 weeks.
One other point I'd make, I heard that the state plans are mandatory. The municipal document that we're discussing is all recommendations and is not mandatory. It's best effort, you know, whatever phrase you want to put on it, so that if on investigation things, you know, the town can make whatever decisions they find is in the best interest of the town, contrary to what's in the plan, because it's all a set of recommendations. And anything that is something like a building code or a zoning law or a capital expel processes.
Sounds like the EDC would like more time to consider the issue and either vote at a later date than for the April 13th deadline, or express a letter of tacit appreciation and support. Is that right, what I'm hearing?
Yes.
How much later would it need to be for you to productively engage as you're describing?
Brad, do you have a perspective on that?
Well, I mean, if we'd have to reformulate May's meeting if you're trying to get some people in to do that, talk to landowners. I suspect I can probably get one, if not two, to do that for the committee. That's the committee's pleasure. I can reach out for the May meeting. I'm assuming we wouldn't hold anything prior to that, but I don't want to assume anything.
So my question is kind of, where does it go if it's not now, then when? It's like, have a couple of people come in and the May meeting, do you feel that's representative of the business community at large? Or is there a May meeting and then a June meeting, and where does this plan how does this plan end up getting closed in regard to having agreement on a climate action plan?
I have a thought. If this group is concerned that we need to hear more from the business community about how they feel about this, I don't think having one or two people is going to give you that sense. So we do have a mailing list. It might be good to hold our next meeting as an information session and invite the business community. If you get 30 or 40 people that attend that, then you might feel that that was enough to let you know how they felt. That's just an idea. You may feel that that's unwieldy. If so, I've just thrown it out there.
I think it's a good idea. I think we've got a lot coming down the pipe for our next meeting. Specifically too, I'm thinking we may have 2 to 3 applications for our grant program that the committee will need to review and vote on at the next meeting. And I know that we were planning to have other folks come in as well.
Could I make a recommendation of having a, let's say, a 6-month window? Zach, Fred, and I could talk about whether it's exactly what goes on, but during that period, we do the business outreach on this and return to take a more formal stance after having a period of evaluation of interest in this and concern about this. Something that's done in the next month. A couple people coming in the next month doesn't convince me that we've really understood the issue. And then you could write a letter to the Board of Selectmen saying EDC's not willing to support it open-ended. We're going to do this evaluation period, and as a result of this evaluation period, we'll get back to you in the fall or whatever. Is that a framework that would work?
I think that's a good idea. I know you're planning to come to the planning board on Tuesday. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't ask for similar input. So that would serve probably the planning board's concerns if they have any as well.
Does anyone have any objections to that proposal, or shall we move on to the next item?
I think that's a good recommendation, Pete. Thank you.
And that is with just to make clear that the climate action plan's approved has this understanding that these other pieces of work have to be done and that the plan would be revised based on the feedback from those processes.
Awesome.
Frankly, the task force that we put together isn't going to be able to pull this to closure independent of all of these committees and your experience and your connections with the communities. We need this type of engagement with the business community to get this done. And so having the task force kind of keep it open, we're just not going to make the progress. So it needs to be put into this, in the first phase of implementation can be this studying of the business perspective on these issues, and then we document the results of that and say, okay, plan is now revised to be something different than what was drafted by the task force.
Great. Well, thank you, Pete, for coming in for your very thoughtful and clear presentation. Fred and I will be in touch about how that 6-month period will look like. We will find some time to discuss the details on that, I'm sure, in the coming week.
Very good. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you, Pete.
So we've gone beyond our 5 o'clock cutoff. I know we did also have Jim Robbins on the agenda for an update on the master plan, which we certainly can move to next month. I don't know, Jim, if there's anything in particular that you'd want to be sure to deliver this month.
So just quickly, the plan is winding into its last stage. The goals and objectives, goals and action statements have been finalized. They will be consolidated by the consultant and redistributed to the advisory committee. We'll hold one more public meeting before the plan is finalized. The committee itself has a couple more public meetings, and one in April and one in May. So we're in the final stages. I'll update you more at the next meeting. I won't take any more time.
Okay. Fred, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I'm sorry. So going forward, what I hope to do is consolidate my report with Zach's, basically. So it's a community development report, and he has a couple of things, but I think he can go through them very quickly.
Okay.
Awesome. I'll just run through them right now. So a few updates is we've issued a certificate of occupancy to Olympus in the last few weeks. We are optimistic that Starbucks at 139 Turnpike Road will open in the next week or so. And we anticipate that the Burger King adjacent to it is not far behind. So we would anticipate that before our next meeting in May, both those businesses will be open and operational. Amazon Robotics is aiming to open their facility in either August or September. So stay tuned, and we will continue to provide updates on that progress as it comes. And very good news is that we are hopeful that a restaurant called The Coop will move into the subway space on West Main Street. And this will be our first business to test out the vacant storefront tax credit program with. And we anticipate that we will have 2 to 3 applications for the EDC grant program by the May meeting, including the Coop as well. Additionally, want to recognize that as well, Middlesex Bank has recently opened a new branch on 65 East Main Street. So I think we have a lot to celebrate and a lot of exciting stuff coming down the pipe as well.
And I forgot one other thing. Kudos to Scott and his company. They've just completed, I think, a first phase of many. Well, actually, it's not the first phase, but many phases of expansion on their particular structure on 5 Oda Street. I'm sorry I didn't mention that before, Scott.
Oh, I appreciate all the help. It was good, very good, very excited, very excited to grow.
Awesome. That's it on my end.
Great job, Zach, and thank you for what, as I said earlier, you would think you've been on board for 3 months. So I think, are you into your maybe second or third week now?
Third week, yeah. I appreciate the phrase. It doesn't feel like I've been on for 3 months.
No, well, that's good too. So great. Well, thank you, everyone. And we certainly will, I'm sure Fred and Zach will be busy and be in contact with others over the month ahead. So we'll be meeting again. It is May 6th. So we do have a few items on the agenda that we just mentioned now. And we'll be putting out a draft agenda. So if you have anything that you'd want to add, please, let us know. But thank you, everyone. We appreciate everyone's commitment.
I think we have to take a vote to close the
Oh, yes,
meeting,
go
right?
ahead.
So I'll make a motion to vote that, I'll make a motion that we close the meeting.
Sullivan, yes.
Yep, Leonardo, yes.
Robbins, yes.
Williams, yes.
Alexander,
Sorry,
yes.
Rarely, yes.
Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.